All right. Welcome, everybody. Um, look forward to connecting with everyone today. Welcome to our RGI 2022 open house. Looking forward to sharing more information about the Institute. I know quite a few more people registered today, but definitely like to respect everybody's time. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and hopefully they can join us later. Just some quick logistics for today. Just kind of housekeeping. This session is being recorded. And after we're done with today's session, I'm going to email a link to that recording as well as today's slides to everybody who registered. So just a little FYI there. Just want to give a quick snapshot of outcomes for this session and how we're going to get there. Today, we're going to orient you all to the Institute's goals and structure, share some considerations you should maybe think about when you're applying for RJI. And we're going to have space to kind of answer all of your lingering questions. And these outcomes, this sort of agenda on the right-hand side is really going to get us to these desired outcomes. So it sort of mirrors those in some ways, but also want to point out that today you're going to hear from two RJI fellows about their experience in RJI and what that has meant for their work. So I just want to give my team members who were able to join us today a quick chance to say hello to everybody. So I'm actually going to stop sharing so that they can have their time on webcam to say hello to folks. I'll go ahead and introduce myself since I'm already talking. My name is Generic Holmes. I am the Associate Director of the Racial Justice Institute at the Schreiber Center. I am located in Brooklyn, New York, and so that's where I am dialing in from today. And I am going to pass things to my colleague Kim to introduce herself.
Hello, Jay. I think it's just me and you today, so they got
I think Terrence is here.
Oh, Terrence is here. Okay, great. Oh, there you are. Thank you. So hi, my name is Kimberly Merchant, and I am the director of the Racial Justice Institute. I appreciate everyone showing interest in the Institute and what it means to us, and you'll learn a little bit more as we go through this. Prior to coming to the Schreiber Center on Poverty Law, I worked, basically I work from my home here in Greenville, Mississippi. Our whole team is remote, so we're all over. And prior to COVID, we were traveling the nation, sort of beating our race equity drum. But as such, I worked for the Mississippi Center for Justice before I started working at the Schreiber Center in 2014. As I was doing my work, I was a part of the very first Racial Justice Institute, and it was transformative for me. No one had ever sort of given me a guide as a director, an advocacy director, in terms of how to do this work in a way that creates sustainable change, transformative change, impactful change. And although I was doing a lot of work, mainly working with young boys of color, mainly Black boys, I had never just taken a step back to examine the why. And after examining the why, taking a step back to then saying, okay, now let's formulate solutions that really get to the root cause of what's happening, rather than just simply representing Black boy after Black boy coming through my door one after the other. So doing a little bit of that because people have an immediate need, but also understanding what's the long-term gain. How do you just stop these folks from coming through the door? And that's what the Institute gave me. So I went from what I call sort of a neutral approach to doing advocacy to a race equity approach, which is a lot more awareness and understanding, and really just taking the time to understand why this is happening so that I can fashion solutions to changing that conundrum. And so that was sort of my experience. So thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to getting to know you and to answering any questions you have. And I'm going to kick it off to my colleague, Terrence, since he's joined us. Thank you, Terrence.
Thank you, Kim. Hello, everyone. Terrence O'Neill, coming to you from just outside of Boston. And I'm the Director of Online Learning here at the Schreiber Center. And for RJI, I just do a little support kind of on the back end with the course site and things of that nature. But I'll just say, if you do end up participating in RJI, you will be in wonderful hands with Kim and Generic. So good luck to you all. Thanks.
Thank you, Terrence. Terrence is our tech guru. Okay, so let me start to share my screen again. I'll quickly go back to oops. Sorry, I feel like I'm having some technical difficulties.
Let me know when you need me to jump in.
Okay, I got it. I got it. I'm sorry. I restarted my computer and, just wanted to act brand new for a moment. All right, so this is the rest of our team. Hopefully you'll have an opportunity to meet them later. So we just introduce ourselves to you all and want to spend a little bit of time getting to know you all and just sort of who's in the space with us and what you're hoping to get out of your time with us today. And so to do this, we're actually going to use Jamboard. So I'm going to stop sharing again, and I'm going to share a link with you all in the chat pod.
I just did.
Oh, thank you so much. So yeah, I'm going to have you join me in Jamboard, and I will show you how to use this tool for those of you who are unfamiliar. I see y'all are popping in here now. Screen again. Okay, so this is Jamboard. It's a fairly simple tool. So what we're going to have you do is respond to the prompts that you see on your screen: name, pronouns, title, or city and state. And again, what you're hoping to get out of your time with us today. And to do this, you can undock a sticky by going to this left-hand navigation that you see here. Go to the fourth icon down that you see me hovering over and click sticky note. One will pop up and you can begin to respond to the prompts here. I see Sana's already got us started. Thank you so much. And for those of you who may be having trouble getting in, I would recommend just trying to refresh in your browser. And if that doesn't work, feel free to just type this information into the chat pod. We'll take it however you can share it with us. So I'm gonna wait just a moment for some more of this to come in and populate. Also see some folks are sharing via chat. Asking for the link again. Yep. Here you are. Okay. All right, so I guess we'll start with Sana here. Sana Fidel, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Deputy Director for Citizens for Juvenile Justice in Boston, Massachusetts, wants to understand the outcomes of being part of the RJI. Well, thanks for that. Yeah, and hopefully our two alums who are joining us today can share a little bit more about what it meant for them in their advocacy and the impact that it's had within their programs. So we've got Anna Ray Hopkins with us today. She heard Katie Soden, Senior Staff Attorney, Alaska Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault in Anchorage, Alaska. Thanks for joining us. Want to learn more about these are RJI impacts for legal services providers. Okay, so again, people looking for information about what this could mean for their advocacy, for their program. And I think we'll definitely cover that today. These are like really popping in here now. Thanks, everybody. We've got Paige Huggins. from JRI Health Law Institute, staff attorney out of Massachusetts, hoping to hear about the Equity Team projects and its long-term impact for participating organizations. All right, thanks for that. Pop over to Corey from Legal Action of Wisconsin, hoping to learn from past participants about how to make a small RGI team impactful, make a big impact out of that for our large firm. Okay, so a lot of people looking to hear more about impact and results from the Institute. Keep these coming in. We'll definitely continue to take a look at this and try to ensure that we are helping you understand more of what you're looking for today. So I'm gonna actually stop sharing and push us ahead. But again, keep that feedback coming in.
I also want to lift up that Jordan Hall is here in the chat pod. So we do see you here in the chat pod as well. He is the Director of Student Affairs at the Detroit Mercy Law. So thank you for joining us, Jordan.
So much trouble with my slides, I apologize. One second. All right. So just wanted to share just a quick note about who we are at Shriver. The Shriver Center on Poverty Law is headquartered in Chicago, Illinois. Our team, our advocates fight for economic and racial justice by litigating, shaping policy, and also training and connecting advocates through programs like the Racial Justice Institute. RJI, the Racial Justice Institute, is housed within Advocate Resources and Training, the art team within the Shriver Center, and our 4 pillars for advocacy are racial justice, leadership development, community power, and affirmative advocacy. I'm actually going to pitch this to Kim.
All right, I was already sort of sharing my story when I introduced myself, but the reality is, we all have our own story and journeys. And over the last couple of years, the discussion, the awareness around race, the inequities that exist within the nation have been a little more prevalent. People are having the discussion. People are using terms like anti-racism. And whether that's in your local town, whether that's in your state, whether that's in your region, or just something that's happened in the nation, there was this change afoot that we sort of saw. You have corporations like Starbucks now saying Black Lives Matter, like we've never seen anything like that before. The reality is, though, anytime that there is any significant change, we have to be prepared for the pushback, the resistance, the backlash. And we've seen quite a bit of that as well this year. And also we have to be prepared for what we call the re-entrenchment, meaning the desire to go back to the norm, to get back to what's comfortable to some, to most, to others, is not comfortable to others. I mean, I guess my point is we're at a point now where we're trying to determine whether this is actually a movement that we're seeing or whether it'll be another moment. Because although there has been some movement and we've seen some, we also see sort of the continual instances of the same oppressions and inequities and harms with communities of color and our BIPOC communities. Next slide, Jay. And so, one example of sort of what we see in a more, I just want to drill down a little bit in terms of what we experience on day-to-day as advocates is like in housing segregation. And the important thing, and why I use this as an example, is that this dates back to centuries. Like, this is not new, what we see today. It's something that has been going on all along. And the idea of redlining that happened in the 1930s and racial covenants that happened at that point, we can look into communities today and see how the beginning of this intentional discrimination against certain groups of folks still impacts housing today. It impacts how you get a loan from the bank to get a home. It impacts where your house is positioned. It's worth $100,000 or $1 million. It impacts whether you live in a neighborhood that people would label as safe, or areas that may not feel as safe, and your ability to have access to not only affordable housing, to safe housing, and what I call healthy housing. And so this is like one of the examples of what we see. And that's why when COVID happened and the inequity started pouring in, this was not new. This is nothing new. We expected that, because underneath all of that, these inequities around health and housing have existed all along. COVID just exposed sort of the underbelly of what already existed. Next slide. And so we just want to learn a little bit more, next slide, Jay, about sort of the advocacy that you're doing. Jay is having technical difficulties. We're going to have to fire you, Jay. And so I want you to join us again back on the Jamboard, or please feel free to put in a chat post. But I want to understand a little bit more about the advocacy that you're doing. And more specifically, I want to hear a little bit about some of the inequities that you see in your advocacy. So if you join us back on the Jamboard, it's on frame 3, and the frames are at the very top corner, at the very top of the screen. You hit that little arrow and it'll take you to the 3rd page, the 3rd frame on Jamboard. It's the same slide. So if you could, just in a little sticky, undock a sticky, just tell me, like, what are some of the inequities that you see in the work that you're doing? And most importantly, I want to hear about any disparities or disproportionalities that you see in relation to race around the work that you're doing. I'm very patient. Oh, somebody asked me to repeat the question. Yeah, I'm asking, like, what area are you working in? Like, subject matter, is it health? Is it education? Is it economic security? And as such, what inequities, racial inequities, that you've seen in the work that you do in whatever field you work in? But they're pouring in now. School discipline, the cradle to prison pipeline, language exclusion, discrimination on the basis of disability. Yes, it rolls deep. I'm specialized in school law, so I've seen all of those. The child welfare system, yes. Communities of color are under more surveillance, and children placed in foster care at a disproportionately high rate. Yes, the child welfare system has so many various institutions and components and parts of it. The juvenile and criminal justice, school policing, student discipline, and the child welfare system. So somebody's already making a correlation, connecting all of these various sectors and how they work together to sort of create these systems and structures that we see. Somebody says they work in the DVSA field. We see racial inequities in shelter services, which leads to racial inequities in who gets referred for legal services, access to other resources. Yes, and that's really astute to understand that how those inequities even impacts people's ability to get access to the work that we do, and the work that we do that we see as something being available to folks who need it the most. We have to also be aware that the access is an issue even to services for folks who need it the most. Somebody says, I work in housing. We see Black people being pushed out of South LA at a rapid clip by gentrification, discrimination, and landlord harassment, going to outer reaches of LA County, where their children face even more racial discrimination. Yeah. All right. Lack of access to healthcare, right? Insufficient medical records, less likely to be approved for benefits. And then I see safe and affordable housing. We talked about housing, all these different sectors. Somebody's talking about law school as a microcosm of the world. Law schools make statements similar to companies during 2020. They really did, but haven't completely lived up to the commitments. Right, DEI hasn't been incorporated into, and I think they saying into the curriculum. Yes, and that's interesting because we've had a few law schools or law students who applied to the Institute before. So I love really sort of exploring what that could look like. Somebody said I work on home ownership issues. Almost 20% of homeowners of color report mortgage delinquencies compared with the 6.6% of white homeowners. And so the point is that these inequities, regardless of what area or field you work in, they exist. And so what the Institute tries to bring to each of these areas is a way for you to become more aware and to do an analysis to examine the why and to really dive below the surface to understand the root causes and then prepare you with various tools and skills to then say, all right, let's create a strategy that doesn't just help the person after person that comes through the door, but really sort of attacks the why, which can be very difficult. Hard work is a long-term work, but it's a different approach that we believe creates more of an impact. So thank you guys for sharing so much on Jamboard. I appreciate the engagement. I feel like this is like session 1 of RJI. Next slide, Jay. All right. So ultimately, the work that we do as advocates and what we're really sort of working towards is increasing people's access to opportunity, because all of these various sectors and areas really play a role in someone's ability to thrive in their overall well-being. Without a great education, oftentimes you can't find a good job. Without a good job, you can't afford the healthy food or living in a safe and healthy home, or even having access to quality justice, or even having health care. And communications is really interesting because no one ever really understood that until COVID, right? When all of our kids were home trying to get their education, the school can give you a laptop, the school can give you a hotspot, but if you live in an area that does not have access to internet, all that is still not helpful. And so they still at some sort of a disadvantage, kids having to be bused to a library, a different sector of a city, because where they live, even with a hotspot, even with the best MacBook, they still just do not have access. So at the end of the day, we're really just trying to increase people's access to opportunity. All right, so now, Jay, next slide. We just wanna, I wanna do a little myth busting with you, if you will. Common myths about what we call race equity advocacy. And we get these all the time. No necessarily right or wrong answers, but I just want to use this as a way to sort of share with you some of the overarching lessons that we teach in the Institute. So Jay, whenever you're ready.
Okay. I'll watch this first poll.
All right, so do you agree or do you disagree that addressing poverty will address racism?
These answers are coming in fast. I'll give you like another 30 seconds on this before I display the answers. Okay, looks like.
All right, so generic has ended the poll. And a lot of our organization, a lot of work we do really is focused around poverty. And a lot of people do take the approach that addressing poverty will address communities of color, because the truth is that the communities that are most impacted by poverty are communities of color. But what you will learn and what we teach in the Institute is that understanding the importance of the intersection between poverty and race is critical to making that transformative, impactful change that you seek to make. Because if we don't examine or understand the reason that particular communities are so disproportionately impacted by poverty, then oftentimes we can miss the mark. And so addressing poverty alone doesn't always address race, but we will dive deeper into why that is and what that looks like in the Institute. All right, Janae, where's question number 2?
Okay, stop sharing this.
So the second question is, organizations like mine are doing race equity work when they represent people of color. This is one of the myths we hear a lot about. Do you agree or do you disagree? I have people coming through my doors. I'm representing all these Black boys who have disciplinary issues. And so as a consequence, I'm doing race equity advocacy.
About halfway there. Give you another 15 seconds on this one.
Yeah, great participation. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. All right, looks like we're done with this one.
All right.
This and share results.
Thank you, Jay. And Karen said in the chat part, the opposite is true. Karen, I don't know, I'm trying to call you out, but if you're comfortable, I would love to hear you share with us your perspective on why you believe the opposite is true. Is Karen still with us?
Oh, that's me. I thought there might be another Karen, sorry. Well, I think there's a misconception that simply because we represent an organization that is made up of people of color, that we're doing everything we can to solve, to create racial justice. And, I think what I think I will learn in the Institute, and what I'm learning as I go along in my work every day, is there's just so much more to it than that. It's, understanding the, everything that you've sort of begun highlighting here, what are the attitudes out there that create the policies that create all of these disproportionate impacts? They're rooted in history, things like redlining, et cetera. So it's got to be a deeper understanding to work toward racial justice, particularly as a white person. I understand that's all around me in my work, and within myself. And that it requires really a deep dive, a deep understanding of history. And so just to say, well, we're representing an organization made up of Black and brown people, that's just not enough.
All right, thank you. And I want to acknowledge and lift up a comment I got from Terrence. He was saying he doesn't like the term people of color, he's Black. And the way people identify and what resonates with them, what offends, those are the discussions that we sort of engage in to understand the nuances and the really diversity around the way people identify and talk about themselves. So Terrence, thank you for lifting it up. I appreciate it. Question number 3, race equity advocacy ignores the needs of poor white communities. Do you agree or do you disagree?
Give you another 20 seconds on this. Looks like about half of everybody has responded. Okay, looks like folks are done with this one.
All right, so most disagree. We had a couple of that agree, and I get this quite often when we're having these discussions. And that is not true. And what you'll learn, and well, not in terms of the approach that we teach, what we've learned in the Institute is no one and in no way does this work suggest or ignore the needs of poor white communities. And that's the importance of not only understanding how poverty works, but understanding how poverty works in conjunction with race. So by making a race-conscious analysis of any particular issue in no way asks that there is some sort of a way of completely ignoring white communities. However, it acknowledges the fact that the reasoning behind those disparities or the communities that are most impacted are really the BIPOC communities, Black, Latinx, Asian in various ways, and that people are impacted in different ways based on their race and ethnicity and other intersectionalities that we'll get into in the Institute. Lots of comments are coming in through the chat pod. I appreciate the various perspectives and you sharing, and these are the kind of discussions that we enjoy having. Last question so we can move forward. My organization, the work that I do, I have some sort of role in addressing systemic racism. All right, we 100% agreement, so I don't have to respond to that. When you're in the right place, so that's great. It requires no explanation in that context. Thank you so much. So I'm going to kick it back to Jay to continue with the orientation of the Institute.
Thanks so much, Kim. Yeah, thanks for y'all's participation. So I'm going to share a bit about the Institute and its structure kind of quickly. Here is a collage of all of our diverse fellows from 2021. That's what they look like. This is actually a breakdown of where they're from and how large their teams were. I know that there's, we get this question a lot around team size and what the appropriate team size is. So kind of wanted to highlight that here, just sort of what it looked like last year. Kim's actually going to talk a little bit more about team composition when she presents at the end of today. And again, just want to note that we'll send you these slides so you'll be able to see sort of what this looked like, but it looks like the average team size was really around 3 or 4. And that's just where it worked for those orgs and sort of who they decided to apply with. You know, RJI is really built on these 7 core practices. And we define these in more detail within the application brochure. But just kind of want to highlight a few here. You know, we start with this concept of structural racialization and the 4 levels of racism, which really helps us identify racism within the context of the institutions that we work with. All of the institutions that you sort of identified when Kim was asking a little bit more about your work and the disparities that you see within it earlier today in Jamboard. Structural racialization is undergirded by this concept of social cognition and implicit bias, which really gives us a better understanding of our cognitive processes and how our brain can play tricks on us and how bias can sort of erupt. And when we know about that bias, we are better able to kind of name how it comes up for us and start to mitigate it within our programs, but also within our work more broadly. Systems thinking helps us examine the systems that we work with and the systems that our clients interact with, so that we can think about, you know, what it looks like for them to, for our clientele to have more positive outcomes when they work within those systems. Framing and communications help us keep race front and center when we're talking about our initiatives, talking about our race equity work. You know, we can sometimes just sort of shy away from talking about and naming race. And we will, you know, kind of provide you with a set of tools that helps you just name race and keep folks in your camp as you just try to gain allyship through the work that you do. And finally, leadership and organizational alignment, which gives us language and tools to really advance a race equity agenda within our organization. Those core practices help support the goals of RJI. You know, advocates come to us and learn these concepts. They take them back to their orgs and start to transform their organizational culture, their policies, their procedures, have an anti-racist focus. Through their work with community, advocates are able to share race equity resources and tools and empower a lasting community-led effort. RJI, I mean, we believe we have a commitment to sort of serve as this national resource center for race equity advocates, which really starts to build momentum and capacity for successful race equity initiatives, which in turn kind of creates these pockets of conversations and network of mentors nationally. Just just kind of want to highlight the structure and schedule of RJI. This is a snapshot of how we're going to spend our time together in 2022. Because of COVID, 2022 is going to be our third fully online iteration. So all of this is going to be done either via Zoom or on our course site. And as you see, RJI is a really big time commitment, but the result or impact of RJI really depends on how much time you put into it. So it's really important that you are able to participate throughout all of these different activities. And the application even asks if you ask how specifically you are going to shift your commitments to be able to show up, to do all of these independent assignments, show up for all of the live sessions, show up for all the equity team meetings and coach meetings. And I guess the last thing I'll say about this is, it's really, I feel like this makes RJI looks like it's like a linear process, but it really isn't. You'll need a lot of time and space for creative thinking. So it's just really important to think about the time commitment and just sort of make sure that you can show up for yourself, for your team, and to kind of flesh out that equity team project. That project really helps support our action learning model. The entire time you're in RJI, you're going to be doing independent learning activities, attending these interactive presentations. You're going to be applying what you learn in small group exercises, but then also applying what you're learning through your work with your equity teams and these initial and sort of interim reports and reflection. And through all of that, it allows us to just sort of better support you. Like as you're turning in these reports, as we're hearing back from your coaches about how it's going, we can continue to provide support and help you build out a sustainable project. Wanted to quickly share a little bit about the network and ways that you can stay engaged after the formal institute wraps. 7 months sounds like a long time, but I feel like it's over before you know it. And then once that 7 months is over, you'll really kind of formally join us in this network. We have a super active listserv where folks share resources and provide support to one another. Those email threads help us understand where there's energy and synergy for ongoing webinar opportunities. How it helps us understand how we can bring people back together to discuss topics that interest everybody. We have a newsletter where we share resources and articles and updates about successful race equity advocacy from within the network. Core Connections on Race Equity is our online collaboration tool. It's just really an online resource that allows us to house all of those resources, all of those articles that are shared through the listserv. Pre-COVID, we have hosted on-site convenings where we bring the network together to, again, sort of do this peer sharing, share tools and resources, examples of race equity advocacy that is working throughout different regions. Also, sort of examples of what hasn't worked so that we can all reflect on what the work could look like moving forward. Hope to be able to host these again soon, just sort of as soon as it's safe for everybody. But wanted to mention that this is also a resource that we really enjoy providing. At a glance, this is what the RJI network looks like currently. You can see we definitely have some geographic gaps to fill. But to date, the network is about 350 members strong. And of course, this year, we're going to invite at least another 40 more network members to join us. So I'm actually going to play a video in just a moment. Our fellows are really our best ambassadors. So just want to play this quick video so you can hear from their perspective what the network is all about. Stop sharing here.
The Racial Justice Institute is a collective of attorneys from across the nation. What makes us unique is that we take more of a legal approach, understanding that that legal approach can only be successful if it's done with the community.
You take this huge problem, which is like racism, which, how do you really begin to combat that? And really like sit down with a piece of paper, with a problem in the middle, with all of these different arrows. And it's like, all right, I'm gonna look at these like 4 dynamics and think about like, who are the actors in these systems? Like, what's your local tipping point? Like, who are gonna be your partners in making sure that we are uplifting people of color?
For me, being part of the Racial Justice Institute, it's a very hopeful space. A lot of people are in this moment where they're really questioning, like, what are the right strategies?
Because there are so many of us now who've graduated from different cohorts across the entire country in different practice areas, we're able to connect with each other and communicate about the work that we're doing. And so we can find more opportunities for intersectional work.
It has given me a set of tools that have just sharpened my race equity work, but really my work as a legal services attorney.
And so for me, even though it's an incredibly challenging place, the more challenging thing, for me is when you're doing just one individual case after the other.
Being a community lawyer means learning when to listen.
So you really have to suspend that lawyer hero ideal.
It is so important to acknowledge your own implicit bias when you are doing this work.
I have peers that I look up to and contact on a regular basis. I have people to call if I have challenges.
So there's no better time to engage in race equity work or race justice work than today, because people are paying attention.
It can be very easy to get stressed out and bogged down by the work that you're doing. It feels like there are crises happening every single day, and sometimes you wonder, what difference does my work in one case matter when everyone else is still going to be suffering and everyone else is still going to be affected by these really racist policies? So by being able to look at it through a bigger picture lens, I'm able to see the value of my work.
The work is really hard. It's hard to see inequities and the effect that they have on people in really disenfranchised and marginalized groups. And so it's really difficult to do it every day and to still keep having passion about it and still being able to give to your clients. And so talking to people who get it and who support you is really meaningful.
So we're creating a space where when we feel the most hopeless, we can come together, just be with each other and encourage one another and continue that shared understanding that we do have the tools to fight this, and we will.
We are the movement.
We are strong together.
We are unapologetic about addressing race.
We're the movement.
We are the movement.
We are the movement.
Right. I'm going to start playing that again. So just wanted you to hear from some of our network members about the value of the Institute, but we also invited 2 alums to join us today. And I'm sure folks are excited to hear from the both of them. Let me just quickly share my screen. So in a moment, we're going to be joined by Denny Chan and Reed Staberger. Denny is from RJI 2019. Reed joined us for RJI 2020. That was our first sort of pandemic cohort. So I know you've heard a lot from us. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves and just kind of share a little bit about the RJI experience from their perspectives. So let me stop sharing, and we're going to go in alphabetical order here. So we will start with Denny.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all and be with you today. I'm really excited to talk a little bit about my experiences with the Shriver Racial Justice Institute, and in a minute you'll understand why I have such a deep appreciation for RJI, because I think it literally gave me the job I have today. So with that being as background, I'm Denny Chan, my pronouns are he, him, and I work at Justice and Aging. We're a national legal advocacy organization dedicated to using the power of the law to fight senior poverty in healthcare, economic security, housing, and elder rights. We're a national backup center that was founded about 50 years ago, hence the background. Happy birthday, Justice and Aging. As Generic said, I was in the 2019 cohort and then have come back in 2020 and in 2021 as a coach. So I feel very much as part of the Shriver family. And I'm here to tell you that this is a wonderful opportunity that you all should apply for and try to get in because there are limited slots. So, you know, I went to the RJI experience in 2019. I was part of a two-person team. So we had myself, and at the time I had a slightly different role. I was a staff attorney on our healthcare team working on Medicare and Medicaid policy for low-income older adults. And the other member of my team was, or is, our deputy director. And that was a really intentional pairing because we wanted to do a project that was focused around home and community-based services under Medicaid, so hence the health component that I would bring, but also wanted to bring practices back across the organization and also wanted to make sure that leadership supported the work. And so hence that was why the deputy director was part of our team. And the equity project that we focused on was really tackling racism in home and community-based services under Medicaid. The idea was that I would go back and work specifically with the health team, and that my teammate, Jennifer, who was our deputy director, would go back and make sure that a lot of those practices and thinking and frameworks and tools were really embedded across the organization. I really hope, I don't know if Shriver folks have made a decision about whether you all are in person or virtual this year, but I really hope that you are in person because I don't think there's anything that quite compares to being on site with a bunch of new faces, all of whom are really shared an alignment to the work. And there's just something that's magical about being in Chicago in the summer with everyone and kind of going through this experience together. I know there's pre-site work and post-site work, but I really am hoping that you all can be in person. And I will say the thing that I think RGI set us up to do really well was to much better articulate why a focus on poverty is not in and of itself. Oh, I'm sorry to hear about the online. But why a focus on poverty in and of itself is not race equity work. And RJI gave us the tools to understand that, articulate that, and really be much more critical, intentional, and deliberate in our thinking. So, we did the onsite in Chicago. We came back. I was tasked with really helping us think through our HCBS work and racism. And I will say, we found it, as much as the Institute ends in the fall, there are a lot of, you're still doing your project well after the Institute formally ends. So in the fall of 2019 and in the early winter of 2020, I found myself, the challenges really were sustaining the momentum. There's something, as I said before, magical about being together and on site. But when you don't have the structure, when you don't have the meeting every month with your coach, and when you have a lot of other, quite frankly, grant deliverables sort of dying for your attention, it was really, really challenging. And so what we decided, especially in light of everything that happened in 2020, I draw sort of a linear line in this series of events, but we decided that we would launch a strategic initiative to advance equity for older adults with a specific focus on race equity for older adults of color within justice and aging. And that involves, one, restructuring how we do our work. So we created a new position, our Director of Equity Advocacy, which I now have the fortune of holding that position. And I lead a team across the organization that is really incorporating a lot of Shriver tools, quite frankly, in our work. And that's a daily sort of practice now. So when I say that, like, without the Shriver RGI experience, I don't quite think I would have my job, there is a pretty clear path in how we did this work and how it was really quite transformational. It certainly doesn't mean that we've solved everything. We are still working within the same systems, right? That Shriver has explored and that we all know and are familiar with. But it does really give me hope that we have now a much more critical framework and understanding of how to approach this in our work, the questions we need to be asking ourselves. I will also say, to the earlier point about the network, I'm emailing the network like all the time. There are people who are like, oh, I get your emails and I've never met them before. And that's the same the other way around. I get a lot of people, because it's all cohorts in one email group, but it's such a tremendous resource. And so even though you may feel like you go back to your organization after your institute program ends, you still are so really well supported, and it's always great to come back and have opportunities to work with people in the program. So where we are today, we're still implementing a lot of the things that we set off to do with the strategic initiative. But I think, one thing I wanted to raise in particular was talk about what this means for our national organization, and then happy to give Reed as much time as they need. But I think we're really still thinking through what this means for a national organization, right? We don't have a service area. We're supporting advocates across the country. One thing we did late last fall that Kim actually helped us with kick off was a series on advancing equity for older adults with our legal services and aging services network. Because we really feel like that's our role in all of this, is supporting the people who are working directly with older adults themselves and really having them think much more critically about what equity means in their work. So I think we still have a lot to figure out, but I have been, I'm deeply indebted. I think we are deeply indebted to our partnership with the Shriver RGI program for really setting us up to do this work really well. So I encourage all of you to apply and feel free, to reach out if you have questions specifically about our experience.
Thank you so much, Denny. Thank you. And we do have time for questions for Denny and Reed, and then also have sort of a block of time for just general questions at the end. So plenty of time if you want a little bit of space to sort of formulate a question for either of them. But I'm going to kick things off to Reed now to share a little bit about their experience.
Hi, everybody. How's it going? It's good to see you all. Oh yeah, I love the engagement. We're like so many years now on Zoom. It's just nice to engage how we can. It's nice to see your face, Denny. I've heard about you from Kim and Generic so much, and I'm like, now we're seeing each other's faces. It's great. And I'll echo what Denny said. You should totally apply. I think it's a great idea. But I want to tell you a little bit more about myself. So my name is Reed Stieberger. My pronouns are they, them, and their. And I work at Legal Assistance of Western New York. So we're an LSC-funded organization in upstate New York. Before that, I worked for Earth Justice as a consulting organizer. And then I also worked for a really small racial justice community organizing nonprofit. And I came in the 2020 cohort, so the first pandemic cohort. And we came in with a project focusing on community lawyering. And that project stalled a bit along the way, but we had another project going along parallel to that we've been working on around organizational alignment. So that's the kind of stuff that happens in the RJI lingo. The organizational alignment is that operation stuff. So your hiring, your recruitment, supervision, human resources, those kinds of things. And that's where RJI really gave us the biggest boost on that organizational alignment project. And so I want to talk through a little bit about what the project specifically was, and then how we approached it and our strategy, and why the RJI network was really critical for us getting that across the finish line. So I also just want to say hi to my co-coordinator of our DEI committee here, Danielle Bernard, who's checking out the call, who wasn't part of our cohort, but is on the call today. So hi, Danielle. So we did a race equity audit of 3 areas of our internal policy at Law New York. So recruitment, hiring, and onboarding, supervision, mentorship, and leadership development, and human resources, grievances, and discrimination policies. Those 3 areas of internal policies. We produced a 100-page report that's been sent out over the RJI listserv. I'm happy to share it with anyone who's interested to see what that product is, and I'll put my email in the chat as well. We had a team that was 12 people. So we did like a diagonal slice of our organization. So diagonal in that it was diverse in organizational rank, tenure at the organization, as well as identity along race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, and age. And in our first part of our project was actually just like building relationships with our management by interviewing them about how they engage in all of these different practices, and then gathering all of the documents that we use to figure out what are the formal policies and then also what are the informal policies, because there's a lot that happens in an organization that isn't written down that has a huge impact on how race equity and other forms of equity do or don't show up in our work. And then we worked with our wonderful, wonderful consultants who I'll pitch, Milo Primo and Liz Nicholas. Work with Just Roots Consulting and Black Amethyst Consulting, who gave us an equity assessment tool, and we applied that to all of our summaries of unwritten policy and written policy. And then we brought in as many resources as we could find, a lot of which came to us through our connections through the RJI network and our coach, Jen Wardell, who works at Just Lead Washington. They have a toolkit on how to do this type of assessment. And we assessed all of our findings so far against those best practices that we were finding out there in the world through the RJI network and through our connections that we had made. So we got feedback from Kim, from Generic, and from Jen, and from a bunch of other folks we had connected to through RJI, feedback from our management, and produced our final report. It took a year to write. And what we came away with was a report that presented some pretty deep problems and some pretty deep inequities that were built into our organization's core functions, but also pathways for how we could transform them. So why did we take this approach of like being so thorough and detailed? You know, this was the 3rd time there had been like a race equity initiative at Legal Assistance of Western New York. The previous 2 had come and dissolved. And without going into why that happened, what we wanted to do is we wanted to be really strategic about how we approached our work. And, you know, in white culture, there's a worship of the written word, right? We say, if you look at Tema Okun's, you know, white supremacy culture, and we wanted to co-opt that to the degree that we could, and present something that would be really hard to dismiss because of the quality and comprehensiveness of the work. Our executive director also really responds really well to like written documents. So we were like, we are gonna hit this really hard. We also wanted to spell out very clearly what we wanted, and provide drafted policies saying this isn't just what's wrong, but this is what we need to do. And here's exactly how we're going to do it. And it's entirely feasible. So that if it was rejected, we'd be able to say, you rejected this strategy that we demonstrated is entirely feasible. So we wanted to have leverage, right? So we wanted to build relationships and have that good faith, but we also wanted to make sure we were building our power along the way. So where are we now? We released our final report last August, and right now we are in our, we have approval to hire 2 DEI managers focusing on advocacy and community lawyering, and focusing on operations and internal training. So that was part of our report. We said we need staff to work on this. One way to look at it is we have a lot of staff who are implicitly maintaining structures of white supremacy, and we are paying them to do that. We should pay some staff to undo that as well, and to build that into how our organization works. So we have that approved, and we'll hopefully be hiring those folks soon. We also have a ranked list of recommendations. We had about 25 or 30 discrete recommendations that we've reviewed with our executive director, and we've tiered them into, yes, we're moving ahead with these. 2, we need project plans, and 3, we need to hash out how they're going to work. But overall, you know, a year after we released our report, we have a comprehensive starting point for the organization, and we're implementing the first round of structural changes. So, you know, we were in the 2020 cohort. We released our report like 6 months after the end of that year. It's another 6 months later. And we're at the beginning of launching this, but it's kind of, you know, it's a big ship you're turning, right? And it takes leaning on that wheel for a long time. So I also just wanted to share, so, you know, Jared was like, you know, share some things that you think would be helpful for people who are thinking about applying. And so I was like, okay, here's what I'm going to say. So first, what you get out of RJI may not be exactly what you came in to get. You know, we intended to develop a community learning project because we had this other project kind of like going already. But our team that we got for that project, it just wasn't the right mix to get that done at that time in our organization during the pandemic. And things were really stressful and we were all transitioning to remote. It didn't work out. But we did dramatically advance this other project through our connections and relationships with the Racial Justice Institute. And without that networking, I think we wouldn't have produced a product that would have had the impact it had. So what we got from RJI was essential, but it was lateral to our intended plans. So, you know, come in with your goals, but allow things to evolve and develop and to emerge in whatever direction they're going to emerge. Yeah, read Adrienne Marie Brown, allow the strategy to be emergent. So the other thing too is like, as you're thinking about joining, like if you want to change policy, policy isn't enough. Like organizations have culture. And our work is really focused on how we're going to change the organizational culture too. So think about that. I mean, the Institute talks about that. As you're thinking about when you're building your team too, solidarity with your team is really important because like Kim said, there's going to be pushback and people are going to potentially yell at you on a phone call in front of 40 people in your organization for proposing things. And having solidarity with your team is going to be really important in those moments like that. Because you've got to be in it together and be on your feet when you hit some of that pushback. So think about the team you're building and how you're going to build relationships with each other, especially when we're all remote and things are just like so stressful all the time. Yeah, and I think this is advice for projects. If you're thinking about being a project or developing a project, is for me, you know, there's that meme out there that like DEI isn't a synonym for like decolonization. And I think that's right. And I always challenge myself to be very careful that the steps we take along our path to liberation are not the same thing as the destination we're getting to. And so not to confuse those incremental steps we often have to take with the place that we're trying to get, which I think can be very tempting in organizations that have been like ours, that have been around for 50 years and are really comfortable doing things the way that they've been doing them for a long time. So that was that's our little recap of our project and my advice on like how to approach, you know, applying to the Institute. I think it's an amazing experience. There are so many wonderful people. Every time I come and connect with Kim and Generic and folks, my spirit is lifted knowing that other folks are out here. So yeah, I'm happy to chat more with anybody. I'll put my contact info in the chat.
Thank you so much for that, Reed. And Denny, yeah, so we have space here for questions for Reed or Denny. I think they are also staying on for the entirety of this session, so they could also help us answer questions at the end. I see Reed is already responding to questions.
Can I say one other thing that Reed comments made me think of? It was just about when you're writing up your proposal and around what your project is and who's on your team. Because I also was involved in at least one round of selection of who should be in the cohort. And, you know, people, I love the like visionary big dreamers, but I also think it's really important to be really specific and clear about what you're trying to do. Some of the proposals that I remember reviewing, it was very unclear to me what the ultimate outcome of the project was. And it's true, like to Reed's point, you might not end up doing it, but we at least want to hear from you about what that vision is, and we want you to be clear about what that vision is, because I think now as a coach, having worked with 2 teams, we want to be able to work with you to refine your project when you come on board. And I've been with teams who end up having to really do a lot of reconfiguration because they weren't as clear in the application about what they wanted to do. So I would encourage you all to be as clear as you could be, and not to bite off more than you can chew, quite frankly. You know, I think we've hinted at this is a slow moving ship in a lot of ways, but it's important to think about what are sort of the meaningful places that you can make change within your organization in the work that you do, and to be clear about that, as clear as you possibly can in your application.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks for that, Denny. And again, thanks for that, Reed. So I don't see any questions come up now. So I think we'll just continue for now, and we'll just respond to questions at the end. One quick question in the chat pod. What about multi-organizational teams? That is, that's acceptable. You're able to apply as multi-org teams. I just think, you know, it's up to you to make the case for that within your application. And share with us why that structure makes sense based on the equity team project that you choose. All right, so I'm gonna kick things off to Kim to keep us going.
All right, so as we begin to wrap up, we thought it'd be great to sort of end this by giving you guys some ideas around considerations you should be thinking about as you develop your teams as well as complete your applications. You've already heard a little bit about that, which is great because that's what was coming next and we didn't even plan that. So 3 big considerations when you are thinking about applying. First, your team selection, who you choose to be on your team can be really important. Second is organizational support. So, you know, your organization will say they support, their sign off on the support letter and everything, but support means more than just that, meaning your organization giving you the space to do all of what you need to do to be successful in both working with your equity team as well as participating in the institute. And then the third is the equity team project. I just want to start, and we'll talk about it a little bit more when we get there, and that no one's going to hold you to your proposed equity team project. Like Reed said, he is sort of morphed, it changed, it evolved, and that's okay because as you learn, as you grow, you may shift and change, and we're open to that and we're okay with that. But we do like to hear and know that your team has met, that there's been a discussion around what the project is, that there's some cohesion and consensus around what that project is, and that you really thought it out in terms of the work that you do. So those are the big 3. I'm going to get into them a little bit more. So the first is the considerations around their team selection. Somebody asked about multi-organizational teams. I love to see multi-organizational teams, but if you're going to create a multi-organizational team, let it be working with folks in the organization that you already work with, or make sure that you are making the case for the connection. Like we're working with this organization because we do similar work and we either aren't currently working together. It's great if you guys are already working together, or this is who we should be working with. And this experience will help us sort of solidify that partnership. We've had multi-organizational teams that have come together who didn't even know each other. Like somebody needed somebody else on their team, and honestly, to do it like for the sake of trying to create diversity, and they all come together, and then they get to RJI and they can't work cohesively because they've never worked together. And even what they want to work on, they're thinking about doing that in different ways. So it is important that if you do a multi-organizational team, which I really love, because you need to be thinking about who I should be working with outside of my organization and making this happen, because we can't do this work alone. But be very strategic about who you select and why you're selecting them, and articulate that in your application. It's important that your team is diverse. We very rarely take homogenous teams. We've seen them, and so just FYI, just giving you a heads up. So we want to see a team be diverse, not just around race, but also gender-wise is helpful. But we have taken teams that have been homogenous. I'm not going to say it hadn't happened, but not our preference. But also think about diversity as it relates to gender and ableism, all sexuality. Just think about a diverse team, because diversity, of course, brings diversity and perspective, and that's really helpful when you're trying to solve big problems and create solutions around your equity team project. But also positional authority. So, teams with the entire leadership of the organization doesn't work, because then they come back and then all of the staff is just like, yeah, why are we making this big change? And then sometimes teams with just staff members, which is okay if that happens, but then you go back and you got to convince your leadership why this is important, why they should do that, vice versa. It just creates lots of issues in terms of trying to get leadership on board when you go back. So you can get a positional sort of diverse team that's really helpful. Somebody maybe on different levels. We definitely like to have folks who are actually doing the work as part of the team is really critical. So a lot of times if we get teams with just leadership, then it's just like no one is here who's actually doing the work. And that makes it difficult when they go back and try and convince staff to do that. We like for people to be creative, like somebody was saying. So to me, a multi-organizational team is a creative application. I love to see that. And not just lawyers. So if you can find maybe a community partner who's doing this work that you can partner with, would be great. Some teams have actually brought their impacted people with lived experience, or people with expertise around these areas. So be creative. I know someone was here from a law school and thinking about what does it look like to shape the minds of these students before they leave school. I think that's beautiful. So these creative teams are really are great. That's okay if your team doesn't look like what the regular teams do. We definitely take that into consideration. One thing about the application is I want to understand why you selected who you selected. And somebody asked earlier, what's the stopgap, the number? And we have taken on large teams of 7 and 8 folks before. And the reason why is because in the application, they were very clear around why they selected these 7 or 8 people, why it's important for them to have all of these folks. And then other times we see applications have 7 or 8 people, and we're just like, yeah, this could really be a team of 3. So if you're going to select members, be sure, and there's a place in the application for you to explain this. We have Karen as a part of our team, because Karen specializes in this area. She does this. We added this person because they are in touch with our community. They're the ones who do the community lawyering. We want that to be a component. We selected this organization because these are the people we should be partnering with. These are the people we would like to move forward in doing our work, because we feel like we could be more powerful together. So just explain why you chose who you chose. The second area of consideration we talked about is organizational support and structure. It's important that your organization honor the fact that this is a time commitment. And it's going to ask you this in the application. And we ask, like, what are you going to change about what you're currently doing in order to participate in the Institute? It is a long 7-month training program and not the cheapest as well. And as such, we want to be sure that this program is impactful. And the only way that can happen is if they are really going to give you the space to do that. And every year a team comes and they say, I just didn't have the time to do it. I just don't have the time. They want me to participate in the Institute and then do all the stuff that I was doing before, or in some instances, a piling on even more work. That's just not going to work if you want this experience to be successful. So I think you should articulate that to your organization, as well as be able to explain in the application why that is the case. I think a great equity team project is also any current, we'll talk about that in a minute, work that you're doing. You may want to consider your project being like, we're doing this work, this is great. I would love to see, like, what does this work look like if we did it with a race equity lens? But one of the things you're gonna have to explain in the application, and we want you to be specific about, is what is the current race equity advocacy that you're doing in your organization. Or if you're not doing it, and that's okay, it doesn't hurt you. So we're not looking for people who are already at the finish line, you know, we're looking for folks all along the spectrum. And so, but if there is work that you're currently doing around race equity advocacy, we would like you to share that. And if there's any internal initiatives that you are doing within your organization, we want to hear about that as well, just about the work you're doing. We want to hear about the successes around that work, and we want to hear about the challenges, because, you know, that is what creates a really robust conversation within the Institute. And then finally, the equity team projects. This is the one that seems to be the heaviest lift for people in terms of both their application, but also when they come to the Institute. Let me be clear. When you answer the question around your project, be sure that you are articulating very explicitly what is the race equity or the racial disparity that you are trying to address in your project. Because oftentimes people will go on and on about their project and what they're doing, and they never once say, you know, I do housing work, and here in Philadelphia, 75% of the women of 75% of the people who are being evicted are Black mothers, and that is a problem, an issue, right? And so just be explicit and be clear around what is the race equity issue you're trying to address. Race equity projects can be internal, but they can also be external. You can have a project that focuses on your external advocacy. You can have a project that focuses on some sort of internal initiative, and some people do a mix between both. So either way, your choice, but please be clear around, and Denny also raised, just be specific around what are you trying to achieve? What is the intended outcome? Why did you choose this project? And I was saying earlier, projects that relate to work that you're currently doing are really great, just simply because you're not having to reinvent the wheel. And also, your equity team project should reflect and it's helpful your team members. We have teams where they come in with somebody from housing, somebody from education, somebody from economic security, and then they pick an education project, and the health and economic security people check out. And you got this one person who's trying to make the project happen, and the other two is like, we don't really know how to help you because that's not the work we do. So be mindful of that. Be mindful that your project incorporates the unique qualities, why you selected that person to be a part of your team anyway. So that all that should sort of should connect in some way. Just want to share with you, you know, as we share with you some network members, we really are mindful of the diversity in our network. We're always looking for new voices in new areas to make sure that we're continuing to have a robust and diverse conversation within the organization. So there are places where we have gaps geographically. We still have some gaps in terms of practice areas. And then we also have gaps as it relates to demographics. And so these are just some of the practice areas where we still have gap. Like Denny, he does elder law, but he may be the only organization, maybe one other, I think, in RJA right now who does that. So we're still looking for people who do that type of work. But this doesn't preclude, if you don't fall into one of these categories, that doesn't mean you won't be selected. Selection really is based on the best application. And if none of the applications have any of these practice areas, but they're the best, those will be the ones that are selected. But these are areas where we do have gaps. And so if you're working in an area, you may want to highlight that in your application because it might give you, a little point here and there. It's a hard time, first of all, when you talk about legal services and civil legal aid, women we just dominate that field. And so finding men is hard enough, and men of color particularly. So we're always looking to build on that gap, and Native and Indigenous populations, immigrant populations, and our trans population as well. So these are areas where we want to continue to grow because they do bring just a different energy and dynamic and perspective to the conversation. And these are geographical gaps. So you can see if your state has a heart, it's because we're longing for you to come join us. The little heart at the right corner is Puerto Rico. It's not on this map, so I had to, be creative. And then to the bottom left is Hawaii, and all the other areas in between, Colorado, Maine, where we have very little to no participation at this point. So again, it's not the be all and end all, but it may get you a little cornerstone because that's an area And the best case scenario, we get somebody from Nevada with a great application, and it'll be a no-brainer. And that's what we're looking for. But just wanted to share some of those important dates. Application deadline is February the 28th. If you have any questions or issues in using the platform, me and Generic are here to answer any questions and help you through. If anybody wants a one-on-one, just lots of teams reached out last year to talk to us before they complete their application, that we're here to do that, and we'll definitely make the time to meet with anyone who wants to. After we get all the applications at the end of February, then the selection committee takes most part of the first 2 or 3 weeks of March, reviewing the applications and coming together to make decisions around who the teams. Ultimately, we try to select about 40 total people, and that'll dictate the number of teams. So we don't have a set number of teams in mind. We have a set number of people. And the reason why we like to keep the number at about 40 is because we like to have interaction. We like for folks to get to know each other. And if, best case scenario, all 40 of your other cohort members by the end of the Institute. While Denny raised the importance of the on-site, we're in a different era right now, so we will not be on site this year. But we will have our network convening as soon as life allows us to do so. And the importance of doing that network convening is bringing all of these cohorts together who've never had that opportunity. So not only will they be able to meet with their own cohorts for the first time, they'll be able to meet these other cohort members that they only see on Zoom, like Reed and Denny seeing each other today. So after the selection committee is finished, we're going to start announcing teams at the March 21st during that week. Be prepared to respond pretty quickly, because when we send it out, we give you about a week to respond with bio, your pick, just some other little housekeeping things you have to do in terms of be prepared for the payment. It's $28.50 this year per team member. And some people do it by credit card, others want to do it by check. We work with you and whatever, but we just need to have a firm acceptance and knowing that you are going to participate once you get the invitation of acceptance. And so, like I said, we're going to start at the 21st, and we're going to want all of that sort of stuff to be due by March the 28th, because we're then prepared and ready to kick off with orientation and to start our journey. All right. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing to see if anyone has any questions at all. And Reed and Denny are still here. If you have a specific question for them or something that they can jump in, and guys, please feel free to jump in. If it's something you feel comfortable answering, you can put your question in the chat pod if you don't feel comfortable unmuting, but here for questions. Anyone? The cost is $2,850. Am I right, Jay?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Don't let me tell nobody wrong.
Yeah, it's just like, it's not a straight even number.
Weird number.
It's like a little hard to remember.
Because I would like a nice solid one, but.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
This is for both Reed and Denny, whoever feels inclined to answer. Really, it stood out to me talking about like organizational buy-in and thinking about collaborating with folks at your organization. Obviously, you would want the folks on your team to be on the same page as you, but what kind of work throughout the 7-month process were you doing with members that weren't necessarily on the team, but were aligned with the project? Or was that something that came afterwards?
I'm happy to start, and Reed, feel free to pick up. Both for us. So what we did was, as the Institute started, even when we were doing the pre-onsite work, every staff meeting, we had a report from our Schreiber RGI team as part of the staff meeting. So everyone in theory on staff knew what was going on. And then after, when we came back, I don't think I can properly communicate how rich the resources are and the tools are that you get in the Institute. And there's a little bit of like, how do you make sure that people who weren't there with you as part of this experience know what happened, and how do you sort of, translate some of that? So what we ended up doing was we did a series of what we ended up calling sort of mini Shrivers, where we picked a couple of tools that we thought were the most important and relevant to our work, and where we thought the staff had the biggest gaps in terms of their development. And so we did sort of mini train the trainers with our health team, with our economic security team, with our elder rights team across the organization. That took a lot longer than just the 7-month period. So there's really like a long-term kind of project or goal to align people with the learnings of the Institute and kind of what we're bringing back.
Yeah, so for us, so we're 150 people, maybe I think on our way up to 170 if anybody ever applies to our organization. I don't know if folks are experiencing that now too. But we're across 14 counties and have 7 offices that merged from like 7 smaller offices that have all this like weird autonomous functioning. I'm sure a couple of other LSC orgs have experienced stuff like that. So, you know, in terms of bringing it back to folks who weren't at RJI, you know, we had our 12-person team working on our audit. And we had regular presentations on our DEI work as a whole to our management team. That was 14 people. But in terms of like specifically, and our DEI committee was 40 people, and that just had stuff going on regularly. And like this was, you know, what was going on with RJI was just rolled into our updates. But in terms of working with like the executive management, and this might come from like my background as an organizer, but we like did a power map of like who supports us and who has the most influence over like the things we want. And, you know, we put people on places and we're like, what do we need to do to get this person to agree to this kind of thing? So that was something we were doing internally, very, very internally. But we were, you know, there are lots of ways we were just updating folks just through the nature of how we approached our DEI work, which was through a big committee of fairly engaged people and then a smaller group that was working on one project. And yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. I want to uplift and call in Lily, who has her hand raised.
Hi, so my question is about the time commitment. DEI is relatively new at our organization, and where I work, everybody wears sort of different hats to do different things. And I know that if I go to my organization, they're going to specifically ask me how much time I need to carve out. And I know there's not a definite answer for that, because the more we put in, the more we get out. But is there any sort of guidance I can provide to them?
Yeah, I can send this to you, but as a part of that application, we did try to go through and look at each part and determine like the time commitment for the readings, the live sessions, and your equity team meetings with coaches, and just try to add all of that up for you so that you could try to have some sense of how much time it will take. So yes, that's a part of the application, but I'll send that to you specifically.
Is that in the brochure, Jay?
It's a part of the application because there's a question where we ask you, are you able to make this specific time commitment? And we list out those dates and hours. And so there's a link to a schedule that shows that time commitment. So it's a part of the application on form site. It's one of the like very last questions.
Is there time for me to ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So I know there was some discussion of if there's a team put together that it should be from different members of the organization, some in leadership, some in staff. I'm just thinking about my organization, and a lot of the people who are the school has asked to look into diversity issues are more staff. Would we need to actively look for someone in a leadership position to also get involved?
And Lily, who are you with?
I'm with Seattle University School of Law.
Your situation is a little different. We were thinking with that comment, it's more around organizations. I guess it really depends on what your project is. So for instance, if you're trying to maybe change or integrate race equity into your curriculum and you have the support from the university to do so, then it wasn't necessarily dictate that you'll need leadership. But that comment was mainly directed towards legal services and civil legal aid organizations, people who go back and try to integrate into their advocacy, and your director of advocacy doesn't understand your experience of what you've learned, and so doesn't get why you're trying to do that, or your ED, folks generally push back on things that they don't know or understand or haven't had that similar experience. And we've had team after team have that issue. And so we were just cautioning people that you need someone there who can give the yes. But in your scenario, I don't think it's the same. So we're going to trust that you pick the team that makes sense for your application.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I'm just gonna flag that we're at time. Definitely want to honor everybody's time. I want to thank Reed and Denny for joining us today. The Institute is what it is because people like them continue to come back and contribute and kind of give back. So I can stay on for a few more minutes if folks still have questions. I'm available. Again, we're going to follow this up with a link to the recording of today's session and the slides. And I can send to everybody that schedule of the sort of time commitment that I just mentioned to Lily. Yeah, so thanks for joining us. As Kim mentioned, if you have any additional questions and would like a one-on-one, please do reach out to us. We're available to meet with folks as you consider to continue to kind of put your application and team together. So just let us know what your needs might be, but we do hope to get applications from you all. And thanks for joining us today.